Welcome back, usual suspects, to Hidden Catastrophe Science, Episode 4. In the previous episodes, we've been looking at the work of a man named Chan Thomas, who wrote a book that discussed the cyclical end of the world. Chan Thomas's work was brought into CIA as part of a briefing and was classified in its association to a briefing to an individual named Art L. and was sanitized to prevent the known name of the individual who prepared that debriefing. As part of our investigation into the catastrophe cycle, we have discovered 3 different versions of the book, beginning with a 1965 version entitled Adam and Eve Story, a 1973 update version which includes a postlude to the Adam and Eve story, and a 1993 version entitled Aftermath, which includes a sequel to the book. All of which are now scanned and posted on SuspectSky.com, including a visual record, a page turning of a document, which provides a data integrity and that you can be sure that you are looking at the actual documents involved with the work of Chan Thomas. We at the SuspectSky channel have been reporting on what Chan Thomas himself has actually said, and we will be reserving our opportunities in later videos for our own analysis and speculation on his work, as well as the scientific basis for the catastrophe cycle. One particular jumping off point that I'd like to let the audience know is to investigate the people that Chan Thomas himself cites as part of his work. There are a number of references to individuals and those individuals' work which provide a robust opportunity for further investigation. We will, as part of this series, be looking into these peripheral individuals and their works, but I highly suggest to the audience that they also take a look into the referenced and recommended sources provided by Chan Thomas. But for now, we will be finishing the review of Chan Thomas's postlude to the Adam and Eve story. And as well, in a future episode, we will be revealing the long-awaited video of who Chan Thomas actually was, including a complete biography, a complete description of his work, as well as his spooky connections to the rest of the conspiratorial realm. Chan Thomas's postlude and the rest of his work is an educated guess about how a very apparent cataclysmic cycle that happens, according to him, every 12,000 years occurs. In prior episodes, we have analyzed and journalized his description of what evidence exists to confirm the existence of this 12,000-year catastrophe cycle, from things such as woolly mammoths frozen in muck, from the Tiwanaku ruins, and even all the way to the Niagara Falls and its degradation. We have identified a series of evidence that Chan Thomas claims proves his catastrophe cycle. For nearly 30 years, Chan Thomas was unable to determine what was the trigger that caused this catastrophe. He claims in the postlude and then in the aftermath version of the book that he has identified that trigger. And we are now, finally, as part of the Hidden Catastrophe Science series, going to describe to you what the trigger is. From the remains of Easter Island to the sedimentary signatures found in the Grand Canyon and to the strata that seems to signify massive deposits of soil that occurred not over millions or even thousands of years, but happened instantaneously. We are now finally going to reveal the trigger that causes the crustal displacement theory. This event, according to Chan Thomas, involves the electromagnetic displacement of the Earth's mantle, which then results in a slippage, which turns the interior of the Earth from a solid into what is much more like a liquid. And the crust will then ride upon the mantle like you could imagine an object riding above the seas according to the rotation of the Earth. And this, according to Chan Thomas, this trigger is electrodynamic in nature, and he postulates that he's identified in his postlude as well as his aftermath edition of the book. Again, this portion, this episode 4 of the series, will be looking at what Chan Thomas described himself. We will be doing future videos of the Hidden Catastrophe Science series, including an ethical roundtable about how this information should be shared, as well as a look at who Chan Thomas was, but also speculations and analysis and perhaps further improvements and enhancements to Chan Thomas's theory of the Earth's cyclical catastrophe series. I'd also like to thank channels such as Suspicious Observers and Oppenheimer Ranch for their support of this series and for their investigation and analysis into Chan Thomas's work. They've done a great job, and I highly suggest that you check out their channels, links to be included below. But now let's get into the rest of the Adam and Eve postlude story. From prior episodes, we've looked at Baalbek, we've looked at Easter Island, we've looked at Tiwanaku, and all the evidence which seems to suggest and enhance and enforce Chan Thomas's theory. We are now going to finish the rest of the postlude to Chan Thomas's work, The Adam and Eve Story. From Gilgamesh to the Greek alphabet, there is an incredible amount of work completed by this individual. For 30 years, this individual has claimed that this is the most important story of our time. Skipping now to the final pages of the postlude, where we begin, now we must leave the pleasures of speculation and return to more serious considerations. He brings in the work of many other scientists, particularly Hans Alfvén, who highlighted the path to the answer of what was the trigger that caused the Earth's crust to become slippery rather than its normal solid state. The answer lied in a field of science called magnetohydrodynamics. And this is an interesting field of investigation because Chan Thomas himself describes what would it look like if you took a glass cylinder of mercury at room temperature and it appears to be liquid, and if you were to float a mirror above that mercury solution. And then, what if we were to put in an agitator, such as the miniature version of a washing machine agitator, in the bottom of the cylinder of that mercury, and then essentially agitate the mercury sufficiently, it would appear to slip the mirror on top of that mercury solution, which analogously would be the crust of the Earth displacing itself as part of the crustal displacement theory. Chan Thomas continues to discuss how this fluidic relationship between an MHD-initiated process, what he calls the trigger, leads to the cataclysmic shell of the Earth attempting to find a new dynamic balance. And this is what we discussed earlier, is the 1,000-mile-per-hour rushing of both air, water, and soil to the equator. This all results, according to Chan Thomas's latest work, as a result of the Earth and its solar system entering what is called an electrical null zone. This null zone causes the trigger which initiates the MHD process, by which every 12,000 or so years the cataclysm occurs. So we must ask ourselves the question, we know that our magnetic poles of the Earth reverse. We have to ask ourselves the question, is this a product of a greater solar system environment or even galactic event, such as Chan Thomas theorized was our entry into an electrical null zone? When we look at Mars, we can see that it's happened before and that this is not unique to the Earth. And I think that that point needs to be exemplified, that this appears to be a solar system and perhaps galaxy-wide event that occurs. This is analogous to the flow of a charge of batteries when the electrical current of a battery is then reversed, and then suddenly the MHD process will cause a slippage of the crust. I also wonder if the evidence that we have found geologically of the magnetic transition and oftentimes magnetic reversal of the poles of the Earth Is this evidence that the Earth and our greater solar system at some points in time pass through some type of null sheet, like Chan Thomas theorized, which causes the crustal displacement event, as well as are we potentially looking at a galaxy-wide event that causes the electromagnetic disruption of the MHD nature of our crust? And could this be potentially considered a galaxy capacitor event? I would now like to cover the final few paragraphs of Chan Thomas's postlude to the Adam and Eve story, where we discuss how Nostradamus and Edgar Cayce talked about the coming apocalypse and the coming catastrophic event, which was recently updated in Chan Thomas's 1993 version of the book entitled Aftermath, where these few last paragraphs were updated. And as far as Chan Thomas is concerned, he believes that between 30 and 500 years from now, we will see the event. And how do we motivate our politicians and our government and our population to do an intensive study to determine what must be done to survive the next cyclical catastrophe? He does not have an answer to that question, but he would like to emphasize the importance of considering what you, what I, what the rest of our population can do to determine how we can survive the next catastrophe.
Now we must leave the pleasures of enjoying our hypothesis and return to more serious considerations. Let's discuss the most elusive piece of the puzzle, the part which has taken 20 years to derive and fit into the puzzle: the trigger, the cause of the cataclysms. My thoughts go back to George Cuvier's challenge to the world of science, which he wrote in 1812, quote, "Discover the cause of these events," end quote. Dr. Hibbins' contemporary adjunct to that challenge is really an inseparable part of it. Any good solution to a consuming mystery must answer all the facts. As the years went by and we remained dissatisfied with our concepts concerning the trigger, we concentrated on that part of the puzzle. It has taken 20 years to find a satisfactory solution, one which answers all the facts. The fascinating work of the Swedish physicist Hans Alfvén lighted the tortuous path to the answer. In the 1950s, he discovered a kind of energy which nobody ever thought existed, which he labeled magnetohydrodynamic energy. Abbreviated, it's called MHD. Actually, it's a combination of magnetic, electrical, and physical forces. It can be described best with what I call a, quote, kitchen example, end quote. Suppose you took a glass cylinder containing mercury at room temperature, and everyone knows it's molten or liquid under those conditions. It's so dense that you can float a glass mirror on top of it. So let's do just that and make some scratches on the mirror. If you shine a light down on the mirror, the light beam will reflect on the ceiling and show images of the scratches in the mirror on the ceiling. Now, let's put an agitator, like a miniature version of a washing machine agitator, in the bottom of the cylinder of mercury, with a shaft or axle going through the bottom of the cylinder and fastened to the agitator. Let's put a handle on the end of the shaft sticking out of the bottom of the cylinder. We can twirl the agitator back and forth with the handle slowly only because the mercury is so dense and heavy, and agitate the mercury in the glass cylinder. When we agitate the mercury in this fashion, we find that the slipperiness of the mercury, atom to atom, is so great that all the motion of the agitator is absorbed by the mercury before it even reaches the top surface where the mirror is. The mirror won't budge. If we wind a wire around the glass cylinder and connect it to a battery, we will have an electromagnet following the same principle used in the doorbell of your home. There's an electrical current flowing around the cylinder and a magnetic field going through the cylinder end to end. Now we find that things have changed. When we rotate the agitator back and forth, the mercury acts as if it were a plastic or near solid. The mirror makes all of the moves that the agitator does, showing that the mercury has lost its internal slipperiness and is moving integrally as if it were almost solid. Alfvén tried a refined version of this experiment in his laboratory. and this is how the phenomenon was discovered. It was first reasoned that tiny electrical charges called eddy currents were being generated in the mercury, which in turn were generating tiny local opposing magnetic fields, and this was causing the solidifying effect. He reasoned that if this were true, the larger the diameter he made of the glass cylinder, the bigger the electrical current and the stronger the magnetic field would have to be to maintain the same physical force link between the agitator and the mirror. He built another agitator vessel with a larger diameter cylinder of mercury and found the reverse to be true. The larger the diameter of the glass cylinder, the less magnetic field strength and electric current needed to maintain the physical force link between the agitator and mirror. This seemingly broke all the rules of known physics and engineering. Hans Alphen realized that he had discovered the existence of a kind of energy traveling from the agitator to the mirror, which was previously undetected by any scientist. His rigorous mathematical work in expanding James Clerk Maxwell's three ingenious equations for expressing electromagnetic radiation, that's radio broadcast to you, showed that there were electrical, magnetic, and physical force fields acting as a combined field between the agitator and mirror. Alphen expanded his mathematical research to show that space is literally a sea of MHD energy, and that, as weak as the magnetic field of any blue-white star is, it is strong enough to support an internal MHD energy structure within the star. Alphen's work also applies to any planet with only one each north and south magnetic pole. I have built several Earth current recording stations and know from personal observation that Earth currents are strong enough to support our planet's inner MHD structure. Now we know that the molten layers inside the Earth act just like the cylinder of mercury in Alphen's experiment. As long as they're permeated with MHD energy, they act as if they were plastic or near solid. We also know that the shell of the Earth, which includes the oceans, the crust, and a teeny part of the mantle, is not dynamically balanced as it stands today. Rough computations show that there is a huge torque of 46.8 times 10 to the 18th power ton-miles tending to rotate the shell about the Earth's interior. Greenland and Antarctica could move toward the equator in less than half a day were the shell free to make the shift. As long as the inner MHD energy structure remains strong enough to make the molten layers act as near solids, the shell will not shift its position about the Earth's interior. To be sure, the shell is shifting ever so gradually. The subject is covered excellently in the paper Latitude and Longitude and the Secular Motion of the Pole by Dr. Markowitz of the U.S. Naval Observatory in Washington, D.C. However, at the time of a cataclysm, the entire solar system passes through a magnetic null zone in the Milky Way galaxy. These null zones are sometimes popularly called reversal zones, and so they are, for the magnetic fields on either side of galactic null zones are in opposite directions. Some physicists have found that we are heading into another null zone at an accelerating rate. It is a known fact of geophysics that the Earth's magnetic field strength, now over 35% less than 300 years ago, is decreasing faster and faster. We are indeed approaching a null zone. In any case, when going through a null zone, our planet's inner MHD energy structure is diminished to the extent that the outer, shallow, molten layer, 60 miles thick, is allowed to act as a free liquid. No longer does it bind the shell of the Earth to its interior, which starts 120 miles deep, as the mirror was bound through the mercury to the agitator by MHD energy in Hans Alphen's experiment. The shell of the Earth is free to find a new dynamic balance about the Earth's interior. It shifts in the direction the torque imbalance of the shell dictates it must go to find its new balance, and the 60-mile deep, white-hot, 2,500 plus degrees Fahrenheit molten layer beneath the outer solid shell lubricates the shift all the way. The trigger, then, is our planet's passage, along with the entire solar system, through a galactic-scale magnetic null zone, diminishing the Earth's inner MHD energy to so low a level that the shallow molten layer starting at 60 miles deep and extending to 120 miles deep is allowed to act as a free liquid lubricating layer between the Earth's shell and solid interior. During each cataclysm, the shell finds its new dynamic balance, which is resolved when the shell is shifted to a position with the ice caps rotating equatorially and melting in the heat of the torrid zone. As they melt relatively fast, and they usually total around 8 million cubic miles of ice, as they do today, the oceans the world over, after the ice melts, rise about 200 feet with the newfound water. New polar ice caps form on the areas moved into the polar regions. They will not be centered with our axis of rotation, so a new growing imbalance is created to grow as the new ice caps grow, to be resolved when the Earth, with its entire solar system, passes through another galactic null zone 10,500 years later. Regarding the shallow molten layer, some geophysicists and seismologists challenge its existence. In 1924, the great seismologist Bino Gutenberg derived from his earthquake seismographic record that the layer must be there. Since then, Hawaiian seismologists have said, quote, "Of course, it's the source of the molten stuff volcanoes spew forth," end quote. And other seismologists say, quote, "Well, it's there, but it's not molten, it's plastic or near solid," end quote. They're both right. It's molten and acts as a near solid because of its MHD content. Oceanography gives the answer. IGY data shows that oceanic tides the world over depress the ocean floors 3/10 of the increase in depth of the water between low and high tides. The molten layer has to be beneath the ocean floor for the floor to be pushed into the earth by just a few feet of water. As surely as there is life left in the universe, there is in our Milky Way galaxy, and as surely there is life in our galaxy, the solar system will traverse another magnetic null zone in it. Indeed, many more. This brings us to the subject of the next cataclysm. As mentioned before, Hale's mathematical analysis sets the Wisconsin era at 14,750 years long. The last cataclysm, Noah, or Utnapishtim's flood, would appear to be 6,993 years ago. Adam and Eve's cataclysm, the end of the Laurentian Ice Age, appears close to 11,543 years ago. Hale's mathematics shows the null zone versus time structure to be helicoid, and as the universe approaches its half-life point, cataclysms occur at an increasing frequency, with the shorter era time periods between them. After the universe has passed its half-life, cataclysms occur at a decreasing frequency, with time periods between them increasing in a mirror image pattern of the first half-life of the universe.
We're going to be looking into all of that shortly, including an ethical roundtable, including an investigation into the biography and history of Chan Thomas, as well as the speculative and the analysis of Chan Thomas's work by this team very shortly. I want to thank all of you for listening, for watching, and for being ever present in our investigation regarding Chan Thomas, his work, and the rest of the catastrophe cycle, which, according to many theorists, may occur in most of our lifetimes. Appreciate you all for listening, and we'll see you again next time.